Welcome, folks, to the regular meeting of council for November the 14th, 2016. I've heard of no changes to the agenda, so I'm looking for approval of the agenda for this evening.
So moved.
All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Public participation. This is the time, folks. Anybody that wants to come and address council, the microphone's there in Ms. Cullington. You know the drill. Welcome.
Cullington, 3338 Asmink Road, and I love the fact that we have a mayor who changes colour with the seasons, so you're looking very autumnal, my dear. I've got 3 items on the agenda I want to touch on, so I'll be very kind of quick and to the point. Wastewater treatment, just a comment that, like so many of you around the table, I have devoted a huge amount of time to this one, and it has to be deeply disappointing that we've lost the opportunity for Colwood to be a leader in this, and more importantly, to do the right thing for our region. It is what it is. Advisory Planning Commission. Turning back the clock, I was on the last one when it was around, which was a few decades ago. So just a couple of suggestions. I noticed that the proposal is a format that sort of includes, 9 people with X, Y, and Z qualifications. Love to suggest that you look at a slightly more inclusive model. I think there are a lot of very good people in Colwood who wouldn't necessarily see themselves in that list, but would have a lot to contribute. And I'm thinking of people with background in the military, people with disabilities, folks who might be part of IACD, folks who are, with young families, folks with a heritage background, folks with an arts background. So suggest maybe some more inclusive language in the bylaw, more along the lines of the city will strive to achieve representation from a diversity of neighbourhoods in the city of Colwood and a diversity of backgrounds, including but not limited to, and then you could have a longer list. Because there are people who are inevitably going to represent more than one of those. There might be a senior with a strong environmental background as well, for example. Another suggestion, I note that the intent is to essentially appoint everybody for a 2-year term, and then following that for 4-year terms. You might want to think about splitting it in half so that you appoint half the folks for 2 years, half for 4 years, and then inevitably you've got a turnover of some kind every couple of years, but you also have continuity in there. Sort of along the same vein, some thoughts on going to a committee of the whole format. I know there are those of you around the table who remember when we had this, and I do remember some very, very, very long meetings. So just to throw out some thoughts, I know you're not talking about this or deciding on this tonight, this is for down the road, but just some thoughts. There's an impact on staff. If their item is late on the agenda, we've got them staff sitting for a long period of time, and for some of them that involves getting paid overtime, and at best it's a waste of their time. I think there's also an impact on members of the public whose item is up for discussion. Certainly I remember at a number of kind of committees where we had a small group of people at the table, relatively few people in the audience, and when people stood up, I mean, this is this very scary format for a lot of people to stand up and have that conversation. And I think those smaller committees give an opportunity for that kind of more informal conversation. I think there were lots of times when, somebody came and what we ended up with wasn't the staff recommendation, but was something that was terribly sensible that was worked out between the person involved, the staff, and the committee members at the table, both council and non-council. I think that's harder to achieve in that big committee of the whole format. I think we lose the input from the non-council members. I certainly remember learning a lot from the non-council committee members, and we all of us need lots of different viewpoints around us to make good decisions. And back to those long meetings, those are very hard chairs, and by the end of the evening, it's very hard for the folks in the audience. And I know it's hard for you folks around the table because you probably had a long period of decision-making after a long day of work. So just some food for thought when you look at considering reforms to the existing committee structure, which may well need some tweaking up. Thank you.
Any other members in the audience? And seeing none, we can move on with our discussions. Mayor's message, I don't have a lot for us. Of course, it was Remembrance Day, and I know I was busy with events around the community on that one. OCP, we have our fill-in spot coming up on Thursday, so that's a night to note. It will be at the Royal Bay School at 6:30 again to take on Dave Woody's discussion that he was unable to attend 2 weeks ago. So we've got that back on schedule. Anybody else from council? With anything? Yes, no. You good? All right, we'll just move on then. Looking to adopt the minutes for the regular meeting of council October 24th. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Receive on minutes for the Heritage Commission October 12th.
Second.
All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. We do have a presentation this evening from Laura Davis, who is the president of the West Shore Arts Council. So Laura, thank you for coming and getting this ready. And I see you brought a host of supporters.
This is Marg Eagle, she's on the board, and this is Christine Buppelsing here. I might have to move this mic. I'm tall. I can't click and do that too. So thank you very much tonight for allowing me to have some time with you to get to know you. So first off, West Shore Arts Council, talk a little bit about our vision. We just really want to connect the arts with the community. That's our vision, and our mandate is for the community and citizens to have art experiences, such as dance, theater, music, storytelling, visual arts, even maybe a time to escape from your everyday life and enjoy some music. We really want to create an outlet for all ages so that they can engage in the arts. So that goes with younger people, families, and seniors. And all of that does bring community together. We serve 5 communities, and it's quite like the Chamber of Commerce, where the Chamber of Commerce oversees kind of all of the for-profit businesses in the community, or the 5 communities. They're an umbrella, as you know, and we like to think of ourselves as a council and an umbrella over all 5 communities for the arts, culture, and heritage. So we assist with local programs and projects for visual and performing arts, literature, and as well as heritage. And one thing we do for the public understanding about why art is a healthy component of community is we write the Arts Beat article, and we have a lot of social media. And not only does it just talk about our community, but it talks about things about the healing of the arts and that sort of thing that impacts mental health and other areas of our lives. Actually, the Arts Council has been together for 28 years. I don't know if a lot of people know that. 2 of the members on the Arts Council have been with the Arts Council for 12 years. So we have been around for a while. And as the community grows, of course, this is becoming quite challenging. We are not-for-profit. British Columbia Arts Council does give us funding, so they're the provincial body that gives us the mandate to do what we're doing in these communities. People might not be aware of that as well. Volunteer hours. This year I've calculated about 1,300 hours. That's about $30,000. And the year's not over yet. I think I budgeted that we would only put in about 7,000. We've well exceeded that in our volunteer time. We were able in the last 2 years to employ a summer jobs program and supplement that with British Columbia Arts Council to employ a community outreach coordinator for the summer months, and then outside of that we had about 4 months with part-time through the British Columbia Arts Council. With that, the municipalities do contribute a very small amount towards those costs. So funding, as you can see, what I've just talked about, and beyond that, we do get some support from sponsorships in kind. West Hills Land Development Corporation has been a great supporter in the past, and we're looking forward to other maybe businesses like that in the other communities to support us as well. So this kind of captures what's going on. So this is the funding that we receive. This is everything. I think in the handout I gave you, it was only the governmental agencies. So you can see we do get corporate support at about 7%. So we've been working hard to, bring in other diverse funding. Machosen and Highlands are low because obviously they have a much smaller population. View Royal as well. And so the city of Colwood is falling a little behind with what we'd like to see. Okay, this just gives you an idea of how we spend our money. I think it's important to let people know that. And the largest is festivals and the community outreach, which is really important. And then we have performing and visual. And our administration is quite low. Oops. So this is where we've been in 2016. I'll just give you a quick recap. This is Four Seasons Musical Theater at Christmas at the Castle. We had a public forum in January. This is some of the board members and our summer student at one of our concerts. This is a Pacific Baroque concert we brought out to Machosen, subsidized by CRD project money, actually. And this is Philip Manning, who is studying to get his master's in violin. He is born and raised in Machosen. This is at Paintin, where we had a small ensemble from the Sukville. At the Paintin, this is Four Seasons Musical. This is one of the plein air painters. This is the youth and student art show at Coast Collective that you guys help fund every year so far. And this is kind of a new body out in the West Shore and in Colwood particularly. I want to say the theater name. I don't have it in front of me. How do you say it? Teachamista. Okay. And so this is them performing there recently. We did have a new initiative for Art at the Pub, which has been received real well, actually in View Royal. This is some of our staff and board member at Canada Day. This is the art project that we had the kids do. This is Youth at Risk. One band formed. This is funded by BCAC and you guys and Langford for this program. A second band coming online right now. This summer speaker series, and I'd like to bring this into Colwood and to Langford in the next year. We've done this in Machosen so far, and it's been very popular. Lantern making at Coast Collective, and then the Lantern Festival. Just a few highlights. And then this is the Macola group. We've got a family art project going on with them. We've done 2 of them so far where the families come out from the residence and have an art project together. And this one, actually, we did fund with British Columbia Arts Council money. And here's Patricia. She made a mask. So then just to talk about current programming, I've already talked about a lot of it in the slides, so you've seen where we've been. We're going to continue that. We look forward to doing some concert series again, and we'd like to use the Titsmitsa theater for a venue for that. And as well, I talked about the Children's Art Show will continue. And one thing I'd like to see for Colwood is to put back into the bursaries. We're able to do it with Belmont, but not with Royal Bay. Community events upcoming. We'll have Chris Millington Band coming. That is a Colwood born and raised family group that plays, and they've been quite successful. And we'll be at the other typical events. One new one is a Recycle Art Project at West Shore Town Center. And we're looking, as you can see there, maybe we can partner with Eats and Beats at the beach and do some work with you guys on that. And I talked about Arts Beat and monthly newsletter. Come on. Also, I know I'm running out of time. We issue $4,000 grant and aid to local artists through BCAC. We do help with business planning, grant applications, communications, and marketing. So as an arts council, we do look after the organizations just beyond giving them a platform to perform or show their work. So here's the wrap-up. I would really like to see an allocation in the budget such that we don't have to come back every year for a grant and aid. And last year we only got $3,000, the year before we got $5,000. So we don't know what that number is going to be, and it would be really advantageous, I think, for us to work together to start out with a certain agreed upon amount and look for that for a 5-year agreement. And hopefully that might increase each year by a certain percentage. That would make sense for our planning and to be sustainable for you and the citizens. Part of the reason I say that is you do have it in your OCP that you are doing arts and culture and heritage, and this is what we are actually doing for you here in your community. Okay, and so the last thing is a tough one. Should the Colwood consider giving to the CRD? I'm just going to pass this on to you and all my research that I've done in working with them and all the municipalities so far here. It might be a good idea to give them a flat amount, because I think you can get that money back through project grants. I'm talking $3,000 or $5,000. I'm not, thinking big dollars. And I think we could leverage that in the future also. If it's over $50,000, an arts organization, they can apply for operating money. That may relieve some pressure on you, and it's something to look at over the next 6 months. They're coming to talk to you, I think in January or February. So I just want to put that out to you, that there is some leverage there. But I think like Sydney does, they give $15,000, flat amount. And that does buy them a lot. So something to look at. Anyway, I thank you for your time. And I hope this provided a picture of who we are a little bit for you. And I look forward to the relationship in the future. You have questions?
Any questions, Laura?
Oh, you must have questions.
Jason?
Yes, just out of curiosity, how is your board chosen?
How is our board chosen? Well, I believe I became a board member because I moved into the area, and I asked if I could be on the board because I have an arts background. So that how it worked for me. What we're going to be doing right this year is putting out an ad in the paper because I'd like to get a treasurer and possibly a new secretary for the board, just so that we don't burn out and we can cycle through. So that is one way we do it. The other way is through the organizations, through our AGM and that sort of thing. We'll put out the feelers to other arts organizations and through the Chamber of Commerce too. We've gone through them to find people. So that's pretty much how we do it at this time.
Laura, thanks very much for coming in.
You're very welcome. Thank you so much.
Moving into our correspondence section, Council, we have 5.1. We have a letter from the Victoria Greenbelt Society requesting a letter of support in creating a 73-acre park at Mary Lake, which is in the district of Highlands. There is a resolution within our, or an ask in there, proposed motion. Councillor Day.
Madam Mayor, I'd be prepared to move the recommendation in the synopsis that the City of Colwood send a letter of support to the Greater Victoria Greenbelt Society in creating the park at Mary Lake in the District of Highlands, and that staff provide the city's logo to the Greater Victoria Greenbelt Society to be used on material showing the city's support in creating that park.
Any discussion, Council? Councillor Martin?
Thank you. I would normally not support something along those lines because, again, it's in another jurisdiction, but I did contact Highlands, and I guess their entire council is very supportive of it, and since they are supportive of it, then I'm happy to support it today.
And just further to that, for some of you that may not know, the Highlands has been at this for a number of years to try and acquire that property as a park. At one point, they were even selling square foot pieces of the land on paper. It wasn't a real transaction, but for a prescribed donation, as they were trying to muster up the funds for that. So I do have a small brochure here that was given to me the other day from the organization, if anyone wants to take a look at it. But if there are no other comments and questions from council, all those in favor? Opposed? It carries. Thank you. Item 5.2 is a letter coming from the town of View Royal and Mayor Screech looking for support in regards to further enhancing the request that has been submitted through and is being worked on at UBCM, but through to the federal government in and around the bringing back of our auxiliary constable program. I just got information today that Langford passed that on their November 7th meeting. Town of View Royal has also had theirs, and so it's just us that they're waiting for. Councillor Day?
Thank you. I think this is definitely supportable, as it would be in the best interests of Colwood and all contributors to the West Shore RCMP to try to reinstate the auxiliary constable program to its former usefulness. And I would so move that we write a letter.
I'll second it, Your Worship.
Any discussion from other members? Councillor Knoll?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I will not be supporting this. While I agree that the RCMP auxiliary does do a wonderful support job, I am totally in disagreement with giving them weapons and having them ride along in police cars. As we've seen from incidents in the United States, poorly trained police officers cause enough trouble with firearms and poor use of them. I don't want to see a bunch of amateurs riding around with our police officers. So if that part was taken out, I could support it, but as it is part of the entire motion, I will not be supporting this.
Thank you. Any other comments? Call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Councillor Knoll noted. Thank you. We have a final letter that comes from Mr. Dale Wall, who was part of the team that was working with Minister Fassbender's office in regards to the update on Capital Integrated Services and Governance Initiative. There is a motion within the memo at the head of that report, looking to have the city put on their website the connecting link through to the Place Speak portion that the Urban Systems is running to gather up information. Councillor Day?
I would move the recommendation to involve the public in consultation.
Seconder?
Second.
Any questions, comments? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Sandra's not here, but we will make sure that she gets that information. New Business Planning and Land Use Committee memo, Director of Planning, in regards to support for elementary school at Royal Bay.
Thank you, Your Worship. The developers of Royal Bay have requested council support for a proposal to the school district to locate a new elementary school at Royal Bay. The proposed location has already been designated within the Royal Bay Area Plan as a future school site and is located to the south of Latoya Boulevard. The development of school site there would have multiple positive impacts on the burgeoning neighborhood at Royal Bay, and staff therefore recommend that council consider making a statement of support for a new elementary school at Royal Bay as outlined in the memorandum in tonight's agenda. Thank you.
Need a mover and a seconder?
I'll move the recommendation, Your Worship.
Discussion, comments, questions to staff? Councillor Day?
Thank you. The only, I think it's a great idea. I think it's a very beneficial location for an elementary school. There was a previous location that was looked at for an elementary school when Royal Bay was first envisioned, which is adjacent to the park in the center of the Woods neighborhood development. And I just would like to put it on record that I certainly hope that we would consider acquiring the remainder of that site for park purposes, as it's quite, it needs a little bit of work. I can see why it would be difficult to put a school there. There is a creek that runs through it, but there are paths that could connect up to the other side of the neighborhood at the end of a cul-de-sac. And it would be very beneficial. The park is well used and much appreciated by all members of South Colwood.
Anybody else? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Next, we move into transportation public infrastructure. One report there, city engineer regarding clean water and wastewater fund.
Thank you. The Clean Water and Wastewater Fund is a new grant program that's accepting applications until November 23rd. It provides up to 83% funding, 50% by the federal government, 33% by the province, and projects that have started since April the 1st are eligible, and the projects must be done by March 31st, 2018. An eligible project that we have that meets the criteria and the timelines and that we have detailed costs for is the Ocean Boulevard Pump Station relocation plan. And the work is already underway for that project, and it's expected to be done in May of 2017. The total cost of the project is $60,704. If we applied and we were successful, we could get a grant of $50,384. And so that would leave Colwood's cost for the project at $10,320. And this amount has already been budgeted for from the sewer TCA account. So the recommendation, it was worded in accordance with the program guidelines, and in particular, we have to confirm how our portion of the funding will be paid for, and that staff and other ineligible costs, such as project management and whatnot, will be paid for by the city and not by the grant program.
Thank you. There is a recommendation before us. Councillor Day?
Just a quick question on the grant program. I note that whatever all the projects must be completed by March 31st, 2018, and we expect this portion of the project to be finished in 2017. Would there be anything about applying for this portion of the grant that would prevent us from applying again for, say, a recommendation for this lift station that comes out of this planning that might be for a more expensive project to actually get the work underway?
I don't know if this program is going to continue again in the fall, in next year or whenever, but I don't see any reason why we would not be able to apply for the actual relocation of the plan under another grant program, or if this program continues.
Thank you. Okay, move the recommendation. Any further comment? Councillor Martin?
Thank you. Can I get a clarification on what is the plan? Like, is the plan just somebody writing something? Is the plan, are we actually doing anything with the plan? Like, I don't know what the plan is.
Your Worship, I can jump in. When we went through the budget cycle last time, staff made a bit of a direction change and suggested that rather than permanently armor the beach and put the beach at risk, we had a preference to take a longer-term vision and look for a new site for that sewage treatment or sewage pump station. So the engineers that were selected to look for the new site is essentially this plan. So they're doing site selection, and in doing that, they have to determine where there's safe locations, how it'll affect the existing distribution lines or collection lines, I guess they're called, and that's basically it. So it's a plan to relocate the pump station into a safer location, and what the implications are in terms of moving pipes and things of that nature.
So will that include a detailed expense costing?
I don't know if it'll be detailed. It will give us, we already have an order of magnitude. It'll probably refine that order of magnitude a bit more in terms of the land. If there's land costs, we'll have an idea of the cost to purchase land. And of course, we won't know the exact amount to build a new pump station and outfit it until we actually tender, but we'll have some pretty good ideas of what that's going to be.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much, Helen, for that. Finance and Administration, 7.2.1, CAO in regards to environmental impact assessment study on the CRD wastewater treatment.
Thank you, Your Worship. As you recall, the project board that's reporting to the CRD board had recommended that $2 million be set aside to complete the environmental impact assessment to discharge sewage to ground in Colwood. And the project board chair and co-chair came out and met with the mayor and myself and wanted to talk about how that would look and get some direction from council. And specifically, what they had explained to us was that with very aggressive growth, the McLaughlin Point has a life of at least 20 years. And I think if you listen to the engineers in the Corps from the municipalities, they believe that 20-year growth is probably more than aggressive. It's probably not even achievable. We're looking at least 30 and possibly longer with technological changes and changes in the habits of consumers. And so we expect that it's likely going to be a very long time before there's a need for expansion. And that expansion may take place within McLaughlin, within the confines of the walls that are going to be built for the existing sewage treatment plant, because there could be significant technological change that happens in that time period. There's also considerable political risk in that what we do today may not be palatable for the councillors 4 or 5 terms or 6 terms from now, and that also applies to the CRD elected officials as well. So we're recommending that rather than proceed with that, with the necessary studies to determine whether discharging to the ground now is the right thing to do, or postpone that until we're closer to a time period where the McLaughlin plant is near capacity, and then make a decision on whether it's the right thing to do at that point in time, which I'm suggesting it be 5 years from their projected capacity, whenever that might be.
Comments, questions?
Thank you. Looking at the recommendations, through the chair to our CAO, looking at the options, A and B don't seem like they're mutually exclusive. Could we not do both?
Your worship, yes, actually,
Or are you
The-
expecting us that the options are A, B, C, and D? Are you asking us to choose A, B, C, or D, or is that the option of
B-
all four?
B is an option with A. It would not be an option with C or D.
Right, okay, got it. Thank you.
Anybody else? Councillor Day?
Thank you. I would have to agree with our member of the public here that it is what it is, and it's unfortunate because after all that time and effort, considerable effort that was made to look at something innovative and that would be more closely related to just-in-time technology, so that as expansion takes place, we could hopefully do something more forward-thinking. We are right back where we started again, forced to participate in a 108 megaliter mega plant downtown based on population projections that are fatally flawed. But as much as I am unhappy with that and the subsequent, additional costs and lack of environmental benefit for the citizens of Colwood, I think it would be foolish to, and I choose that word carefully, but foolish to start trying to plan for a future that's that far away. So I would agree with and be willing to move the recommendation.
Seconder?
Second.
And I'll just say, we sat there for a number of years and did our best to try and get something different out of what direction we're heading. But for me, it just doesn't make any sense at all to continue to put more effort, more time, more money into something that's going to then get sat on a shelf for 20 years. Technology is changing every year. That brings better solutions forward. So it just wouldn't be a prudent use of taxpayers' dollars, I don't feel. So with that, call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. 7.2.2, again, CAO, Introduction to Organizational Change. You do have a PowerPoint presentation. Oh, you still itty-bitty print. Should have brought my binoculars. Thank you.
Mayor and Council, I thought it was prudent that we start rolling out the organizational changes that will probably occur over the next year. I'll start off with this first slide that's just an overview of the existing structure that's in place today. Not terribly exciting. I'm going to move through this fairly quickly because when I get into the individual functions, it'll make a lot more sense. So this is the new structure, at least the first phase of the new structure. And I'd like to just stay focused on functions as opposed to getting into discussions about people. The first change that I'd just like to point out on this new structure is where I've located communications. It used to be, if you look up here, it was, did I get the mouse to work? No. It was in between administration and finance, all on that same plane. On this new structure, I've moved it up. It doesn't mean that communications has authority over all of these other departments, or all those departments report to communications, but what it does mean is that the communications function now is essentially an extension of me. So when communications is working with the various departments, those departments should understand that the expectations or the goals that communications are trying to achieve in dealing with those departments are actually a reflection of what I'm trying to get them to achieve through communications. So in other words, if the planning department was doing something and communications wanted more done in a way of public engagement, then that's a direction coming from me, even though it might be coming from the communications manager, as an example. So you'll see this throughout. Every time we talk about a function moving forward, you'll see communications further along. So I'm just going to move into the next slide so that it makes it a little more obvious. But before we do that, I'm going to be focusing on everything to the right of the line that comes down from me. So in other words, engineering and public works, planning, development and subdivision, and inspection services. That's the area that we're going to focus on tonight. So getting into the first big change, we're calling this the development team. And of course, I'm going to be heading it up for a while. Communications will be overseeing all of the engagement components to this team. Engineering and public works has changed a little bit in that the development component that has previously been within the engineering umbrella is now going to be pulled out of engineering. And so there'll be a new function called development and subdivision. And that will report to me, but only until this new development team is functioning to the high capacity I expect, and that we have all of our new policies in place and procedures so that we're providing more certainty both to the community and to the development community as well in the way we process our applications for development. Planning, largely there is no change. Inspection services used to be under engineering as well, and that's now also reporting to me again to create this development team. Over time, development and subdivision and inspection service functions will likely move into back under either engineering and planning, one of those or both of those departments. But until we get this this process nailed down, they're all going to be reporting to me for a little while. So getting into the specifics, and I'm glad these are nice and big so everybody can see them. At the top of this slide, you can see that I've titled it Community Infrastructure, and that's really where engineering's focus is now going to be. And you can see in the heading for that department, it says Oversight and Departmental Vision into Planning, Design, Programming of New, Renewal, and Maintenance of the City's Built and Natural Environment. So they're really going to have a focus on asset management and looking after what we have today, making sure that we get as much life out of what we have today and through either renewal or maintenance. And of course, continuing to build new as the demands require, such as putting in new sidewalks on Machosin Road or something like that. Specifically in the engineering department, it's planning, design, and programming of the city's built and natural environment. So planning and design is quite obvious. Programming is really getting into the world of asset management. And you've heard of things like pavement management plans. That's the programming that we refer to. So we'll be looking for the engineering department to focus on creating those pavement management plans, building maintenance and renewal plans, sidewalks, sewer, and that's the programming component of what engineering will be working on. And I've added here city's built and natural environment. So we always take for granted the natural environment. And we need to actually start focusing on it as being an asset within the community. There's both benefits from our own infrastructure. We take it for granted that we have to run stormwater, for instance, through a pipe when there might be a natural water course that we can access for the same purposes with just a little bit of cleaning in advance of it entering that natural water course. Trees have the ability to provide shade, cooling effect, stormwater retention. There's all of these issues that we need to start actually recognizing as community assets and community infrastructure. The beach, we've always, particularly this past year, really started to acknowledge that it's an important asset in the community, and it's certainly becoming a hot topic in our OCP discussions. So that's engineering is going to be looking a lot closer at the natural side of our natural side of our environment, not just the built side. And then Public Works, not really any change there. They're going to continue to do maintenance and construction, but again, on the city's built and natural environment. So they'll be maintaining that natural environment, which they do already, maintaining our parks and our beach, but we're going to just put a little more emphasis on that. Getting into community planning, not a heck of a lot of a change there. I'm hoping through this process of moving some of the development pressures into development that our community planning department can focus a bit more on planning and not application processing. So it truly will be a community planning department as opposed to just development processing. So they'll be overseeing the official community plan implementation once it's adopted by council. They'll ensure developments are compliant with all the city's land use policies, such as the OCP, zoning, development permits, etc. And they'll also do parks planning, which is back to the future issue. Planning used to do parks planning. Because of the pressures around development, they passed it off, and we're going to try and move parks planning back into planning. This isn't parks maintenance planning, it's parks acquisition planning. So it's about where do we need future parks? Where should they be? Where should they be expanded? Which is definitely a land use side of the equation. The building of parks, building of equipment in parks, and the maintenance of parks will continue to stay in engineering. Planning will still be very heavily involved with development, obviously, because all of the regulatory bylaws that are associated with development fall in the planning department, so they'll be the overseers of those policies and making sure that developments are following the policies. So the new function, development...
Ian, just before you move on there, would trails also happen in that community planning sector?
It would be a combination. So if through the process there was identification for a trail to be passing through an area of town, then planning would get involved in how do we acquire those lands to continue that trail. But if it's trails being built within existing parks, then it would be an engineering function. So development and subdivision. So this is the new function. It's heavy on the engineering side of the equation. So it's looking after all of the engineering requirements for a subdivision or for a development. It will also do centralized tracking, which is largely an administrative function, but we need to have one single focused area that's tracking development from cradle to grave. So when it comes in through an application, through planning, for instance, and goes through various referrals throughout the city and externally, and also goes into engineering for, in this case, it would come to development now, but it would traditionally it would have gone through engineering, and then as well into the building department. So this department would now do that tracking to make sure that referrals are being followed up on, and building permit variety of regulations are being followed, or covenants, and then of course anything that has to do with subdivision would be handled in this department. The subdivision approving officer would also fall into this department as well. And that the manager for this position has been posted. It's actually just closed on Friday, and we're reviewing the applications right now. And lastly, inspection services. So this formerly was reporting to engineering, and now it's reporting to me. And as you can see, it's oversight, vision, planning of departmental goals and objectives, and coordination of resources. Secondary suites compliance also falls into this department. So this is primarily building inspections. And the only addition is that I'm making it clearly a requirement of the building department to deal with secondary suites. And they'll be working very closely with the planning department and with bylaw services. Oops. So I think that's it for my presentation. It's just questions. Mayor Hamilton.
Councillor Day.
Thanks. I would just like to understand the development and subdivision role. I'm wondering how is there oversight or public input so that the public could be assured that the approvals are being granted in only when they're fully compliant, etc.
Well, this is not changing any of our policies. This is rearrangement of our staffing to respond in a more effective manner than we have in the past. So it's subdivision approving officer is an autonomous position. It doesn't, it has very little oversight. If it's not, other than if the approving officer is not following city procedures and policies, then the person should be terminated, because it's critical that that approving officer follow policy. But otherwise, they are autonomous from council, because it's a very procedurally driven process, and they follow council through council policy. The rest of it, until there's a change in the way council wants applications and developments to be reviewed, and the public and council oversight, that none of that changes. This is all internal in terms of how we deal with it within the confines of City Hall, not the way we would deal with public hearings or public open houses or any of those issues. All of those processes remain the same.
So then strictly the approving officer is going to be implementing the policies as they're written or as they have been varied by council?
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you.
So one of the, if I can just use that as a bit of a segue, one of the things that council made abundantly clear to me, both when I got hired and through the strategic planning, was that we desperately needed to get caught up with our policies around development, which is the OCP and the land use bylaw. And so we're in the midst of doing the OCP, and council awarded a contract for the OCP and the land use bylaw, and we're working on that as we speak, and we will be over the next year. The subdivision standards and specifications bylaw is another one that's severely overdue, and we're hoping to get started on that within the next month and have a draft for council in the early new year. So the idea is to get I call it contemporize our policies around land use and development, and then have this team working on following those policies rather than having to create this whole realm of variances that we currently go through right now. And it'll provide a great deal of certainty both to the residents, but it'll also provide a great deal of certainty to the business and development community as well, so they know what they're getting into when they buy property here to develop, rather than not know at the moment.
Councillor Logan?
Thank you, Worship. I was just going to address that too, Ian. And in fact, I think if anything, the structural changes, which are really the first structural changes that we've had internally in many, many, many years, will tend to firm up the development process, in that we can make sure that all the check boxes are ticked as an application goes through. And I think that's one thing that we've been criticized as an organization about, is, because one department or another has so many balls in the air, and it's tough to focus on one particular area, whether it's development or whether it's roads and sewers and whatnot, and things kind of get lost in the shuffle. So I think given where we are in this day and age, we've got many years left to develop out. So I'm actually quite enthusiastic that we're moving in this direction, because it will then focus, and I think the city and the taxpayer will get what they need out of developers, because that's the sole focus of the development and subdivision department. So I'm fully on board, and I'm sure that the structure will evolve too as we kind of get our footing and figure out where we want to go, maybe next year, a year down the road. So I appreciate the quick work you've done here, Ian.
Councillor Knoll?
Yes, I agree with Councillor Logan that reorganization is probably a good thing. It looks like a logical presentation. What does concern me is the report is very light on the financial implications of all of this. And that is the one thing that worries me when you start talking new staff, moving staff around, etc. It always costs money, even if it's not money for just paying the staff, it's for equipment and offices and so on and so on. So it's my one concern with the plan is how much.
Your Worship, this is the first, I'm going to say the first step in restructure, and there is steps moving forward that are going to become part of our 2017 budget discussion. And if Council wants to push some of that off into 2018, then it's going to become a budget discussion for some items. This particular portion of this process has no budget implications. So as we roll forward, and there is some additional steps, I'll be bringing some of them forward to Council first in camera if there's some personnel issues. But for the most part, I expect that the balance of this discussion will happen in the new year and also during budget discussions. I don't expect, though, to see any significant budget increases as a result of the changes.
Thank you. Anyone else? Do you need a motion to receive, or?
Nope, it's just an update.
Just information? All right, thank you. Moving on then to 7.2.3, again, CAO, establishment of the Advisory Planning Commission.
I just need some water. Your Worship, one of the areas that the city has a great deal of pressure is around development. As we just talked about, we're restructuring the staffing to accommodate the pressures that are coming from the development area. Probably the most the most criticized business that council gets into is decisions around land use planning, because it affects so many people directly. So we're proposing that we broaden the public process in evaluating land use planning applications, rather than using the Planning and Land Use Committee, which is, I believe, 3 members of council and 2 members of the public, that we go to a commission model, which is at least proposing 9 members of a commission that would all be members of the public. And under the legislation, land use or advisory planning commission cannot have a voting member of council on the commission, so we are proposing that there'd be 2 councillors as resources on that commission, so they'd still be there participating as active members, but only as a resource. They would not be voting. And then, of course, staff would be there as a resource, and they'd be providing all the secretariat services to the APC as well. The purpose is to get a broader perspective from the residents of Colwood about applications, and bring some expertise to the table, such as an architect or a landscape architect and a developer in the business community, but also to, as the speaker spoke earlier, bring in expertise there within the community, such as seniors or youth, environmental specialists, things of that nature. And it's just to, it's not to replace or supplant council authority. It's to actually enhance your decision-making abilities and make sure that you're a little more informed than you are just simply from a staff report. And no disrespect to the Planning and Land Use Committee, but you're getting a broader perspective than 2 members of the public. You're getting potentially 9 different voices rather than 2. And so that's really what we're proposing here tonight, is a commission to replace the Planning and Land Use Committee, and I think I should just answer questions.
So this is your time for question asking. Councillor Day.
Thank you. So the Advisory Planning Committee, is that without changing any of the other structures? Like, that's not talking about going to a committee of the whole system, that's strictly replacing the Planning and Land Use Committee with the Advisory Planning Commission?
Correct.
And so just a couple of comments. I think that it can be very good. And I noted the desire to, of this council to be more, reaching out more to members of our community. But the downside to that can be if council is then put in a position to choose to do something different than what the members of the Advisory Planning Commission want to do or recommended that we do. And I do so, and I've seen that happen. So I am I'm concerned that we need to broaden our idea of who would be on the committee in terms of our citizen member did mention that they need to be from different parts of Colwood, which I think is really important as well, because different areas of Colwood have different experiences and different views. And I'm also a little bit concerned about the 4-year term. I agree with the term limits in that we want it not to stagnate and always be those same opinions. We want it to hear from different people in our community. But 4 years is a long time. And I realized that we could replace someone who stepped aside. But what is the process if we, it puts council in a difficult position if there's someone on the Advisory Planning Commission and we don't feel that we're getting as good of information from that commission as we would perhaps with a different appointment, then that gets a little bit difficult as well. So I just thought a shorter term would be important, maybe 2 years, and then maybe the term limit is 3 terms, and then we could do some staggering, which will eventually, I guess, happen as people get out of sync with each other in their appointments. The other thing that I have seen make a great deal of difference in reviewing applications is site visits. So I'm wondering, would City Hall staff be supporting the Advisory Planning Commission to actually make site visits and look at the ground where the proposal is being made?
I'm looking across at our Director of Planning.
Your Worship, I am always a big fan of field trips, but I guess it would come down to logistical challenges, and I certainly make a point and expect of my staff that every time there's a development application that we attend the site. Going to sites is invaluable in terms of seeing the conditions that exist. So I think certainly that could be an option, but it would certainly, the realities of getting a large group to a site would probably become a challenge, but I could certainly see it being incorporated into key applications.
Thank you. And I think it's great that the membership would elect their own chair. I think that's a good thing rather than it being directed. And I think it's also good that the membership would be approved by all of council and it's not strictly through one mayor. Not that I'm faulting a mayor, it's just that one person, there's a perception in the public that there could be an agenda, not planning a process for all eventualities. We hopefully leave a process in place that works. So maybe not this mayor, but some other mayor who at some future date would have to contend with the issues. So other than the term's length, and perhaps adding some language in terms of where people live in our community. And I think it is important that they do live in our community.
Your Worship, on the diversity of the applicants, the recommendation number 3 said direct staff to advertise and solicit for applicants to the Advisory Planning Commission and report back to council with an evaluation process and applicant list. So it was our intention that we would develop a matrix, and that matrix would be approved by council prior to you going into the evaluation process of who you want to select. So we would get approval on the matrix. We'd fill out the matrix to the best of our ability based on our interpretation of the applicants, and then report that matrix to council for the selection process. And that matrix doesn't have to be restricted to just what the bylaw says. If we would naturally do a lot of what the speaker had mentioned, which would be looking for age diversity, a mix of male and female, and I hadn't thought about geographic, but we could also include on a map where the applicants are coming from, so that we don't get all of them from Royal Bay, for instance, but we get them from all over town. So I don't know if it's necessary to amend the bylaw to do that, as long as we provide you with a matrix that's completely at council's discretion on whether it's appropriate or not for the evaluation process. If it's council's wish to go to 2 years, a motion would be extremely helpful for us.
Well, on the terms, I think also I like the idea of staggering the time frame. So, in initiating anything, there might be, the consideration of a longer term for some, but then running a staggered, if it's 9, 5, like 5 and 4 split kind of a thing that they move away from. If it's, in going to a 2-year term, still stagger that off in cycles. Councillor Knoll?
An interesting concept. I too served for a term on the Advisory Planning Commission under Mayor John Bergbush. I found it to be a very frustrating experience in that the council seldom listened to the advice that came out of the commission. This is a completely different council. I'm hoping we would do a better job at it. As far as a 4-year term goes, I think we're going to have a heck of a time finding 9 volunteers, let alone 9 volunteers for a 4-year term. So I would really suggest the 2-year term is more adequate. And I would not like to see the term span the term of the council, because that would kind of handcuff the next council from appointing new members as they see fit. So I'm willing to give it a try. I agree that the current committee system doesn't really seem to be doing what council really wants of it. So I would support the bylaw, but I would recommend the changing to a 2-year term.
Your Worship, if I can just address some of the concerns around council following the recommendations of a committee or a commission, and I don't think it really matters whether it's the Planning and Land Use Committee today or if it's a Advisory Planning Commission in the future. It's there's two things that come into play. Number one, if council's created a committee or a commission, it's to seek advice. And one of the things that I think is critically important with a commission is that we don't just get recommendations from them. We get advice as well. And that's really to counteract some of the problems around that will happen. It does happen all the time where council doesn't agree with a committee or a commission's decision and goes a different route. And so one of the things I struggled with working on this was trying to get the guidebook established, and I finally gave up because I would be working on it forever without knowing whether I had council direction to proceed this route or not. But it's critically important to communicate clearly to the commission that their recommendations aren't going to be followed all the time. And in fact, there might even be staff reports that go to council accompanying the commission recommendation that is contrary. So it may not just be council, it might also be staff saying we don't agree with the direction of the commission. And then council's going to have to weigh both recommendations and might come up with a third solution. So that's perfectly normal and it's acceptable, but it's all about managing the expectations of the commission. But we also need to really reinforce that we want them to also provide us with advice. So a bit of a commentary on the application as opposed to just the recommendation would be extremely helpful, because there's things that council can glean from some observations or some comments that are made by the commission that you may not otherwise get if it just came to us in the form of a recommendation. So we'll also be reinforcing that, and we think that, I don't know what the solution is yet, but one of the things that Pat showed me today was a bit of a commentary that goes in front of the commission before each meeting, and that just reinforces some of these ideals so that they're not lost over time.
I know Councillor Logan has a question, but Would public hearings still be part of the process overall when we go through these?
Yes, Your Worship, the APC only replaces the Planning and Land Use Committee. All other procedures remain the same.
Okay, so there's another venue of information that comes in. Councillor Logan.
Thank you, Worship. Through you to the CAO. So the report was weighted heavily on the fact that the APC involves a greater portion of the public in the decision-making process. But I'm wondering where the service improvements are to the customer on the other side. So that is the applicant that would come before the APC, and how they feel this process would aid them or make things more efficient to get their application heard or before or a decision made on their application versus what happens now.
The APC on its own is not going to improve the conditions for a developer. It's a combination of the way we process the applications internally, and then largely some decisions that council has to make about the way we handle other committees later on, which we aren't prepared to talk about in detail tonight. I think we need to refer that to a bit of a working session with council and staff to talk about all of the issues around committees. But we do, at the governance level, we do an awful lot of referrals or sending applicants off to other committees as well that, at least in my opinion, are committees that should be focusing on policy development for council as opposed to application review, which is, in my mind, in my view anyway, is a staff function and a function of the Advisory Planning Commission. So it's my hope that when we talk about committees in the future, even if they all stay in place as is, that we bring more clarity around the mandate of each committee and the expectations that council has of those committees, and reduce the amount of handling by various committees of a particular application.
Thank you. And just another question, Madam Chair. The membership, I'm less worried about the geographic representation, because I think with nine members, I think that's going to happen naturally anyways. But are you looking at, when you're looking at the composition of this commission, that there is a certain makeup that would be professional, i.e. Architect, that sort of thing? And I ask that because although the reports coming from staff are a wealth of information, well written, etc., I think it would be beneficial to have that additional advice from an architect, landscape architect, or whatnot, as another level to reinforce what staff are saying as well, or to help answer the questions of council, the public, or other commission members on maybe something that's more their expertise. You know what I mean?
Yes, Your Worship, there's specifically an architect or a landscape architect is one of the requirements, as well as well, I'll read them off. So there's areas of interest and expertise that will be sought from the following: the education sector, the environmental matters, land development industry, local business community, representatives of youth in the community, representative of the community age 65 plus population, architect or landscape architect, and 2 representatives of the community at large. In other words, there's no specified conditions for the 2 at large, but as the speaker mentioned, there can be overlap with this, so we can get people that are covering off both, but at minimum we should try and at least get somebody who represents each of these categories.
So would you imagine, just one more question, Your Worship, that if, as an example, you didn't have a representative from the education sector, that it would simply go vacant until we got a representative from that, as opposed to filling that role with somebody that may be outside of the...
No, I think it would be prudent for us to actually try and, if we can't get it through advertising, then do it through our own networks of trying to encourage somebody from the education sector to be a participant.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
Oh, sorry.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have any questions. I just have statements. So I'm happy to just wait. Or do you want it now? When do you want it? You want it after the motion? Sure. I'll wait till after the motion then. I don't have any questions.
I would just like to move the amendment to the 2-year term. 2 years instead of 4.
And consider it staggered?
And consider it, I'm sorry, what?
Well,
Oh, staggered.
in the appointment process?
I think that will happen naturally.
Mhm.
I just think in establishing it, I think that might be difficult because of our term length as well.
Okay, so amended to a 2-year term. Seconder on that, please. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. So then the main motion as amended?
Sorry, just
That's
a
okay.
clarification because I was just thinking the term limits that are in there. So it had maximum of 2 consecutive terms of 4 years, so that would be 8 years. So I was going to suggest an amendment would to sort of meet in the middle would be 3 terms, maximum of 3 terms, so that would put it at 6 years maximum on the Advisory Planning Committee. Maybe we can add that to my motion if the seconder is happy with that.
Are we all right with that one? Yep, that's good. So
Okay.
you've got those 2. Then on the main motion then, folks, all those in favor?
No, I want comments.
Oh, you want comments?
I do.
Have a comment.
Thank you.
Or 6.
Thanks. I'm not going to support this. I had sort of let our CAO know ahead of time that I wasn't supportive of it. We did try this before, and as Councillor Knowles has already said, that there was a certain frustration that occurs within this. I've also spoken to some other municipalities that have commissions right now, and I won't mention them, but they have deer issues. And they have commissions, and they hate them. The commissions, the problem they're having with the commissions is the commissions start believing that they're dictating policy. And what happens is it puts a lot of pressure back onto the council because the council is now being lobbied on a regular basis on why they're not following what the commission's telling them to follow. So I think I don't actually see a huge issue with the way our planning committee is operating right now. I think it gets to a point that, yeah, it would be valuable, absolutely, to have those professions that were mentioned this evening, but I don't think they necessarily have to be built into a whole commission. I also worry about pressures. That as politicians, we all know that we can sit in a room with 100 people who are opposing a specific project, but still be able to see the bigger picture, whereas it becomes a lot harder with that pressure when you know, you've got a room full of people saying, don't do this, please don't do this, and they're not looking at the bigger picture. And I also feel very uncomfortable with the fact that no council would have a voting right in this commission, because it ends up being, I feel as though you end up just letting it wash over you at the end versus being able to actually have some movement and some persuasion. I know you can have some persuasion on this committee, but I'm very sold on the way our planning committee is working in the present time, so I'm not actually going to support this. And I could go through a whole list of things, but I don't want to.
Councillor Day?
I have to admit to finding change difficult, but I don't think any one system is perfect, and I think that we have repeatedly, through many different issues that we've faced, we have turned to our public and asked for more input, whether it's the OCP, parks, or any other issue. So I think, of course, there is the risk of setting up an expectation within the members of the commission that, you know, they're demigods, and unelected as they may be, that their appointments give them a certain power. But what it does do, and I'm trusting that we can manage those expectations by good communication and by involving people in the process. But what it does do is it gets more people involved, and maybe more people who aren't just the not in my backyard people, but who are people who are looking holistically at Colwood and saying, you know, doing what we have to do up here really, and saying, you know, okay, maybe I don't like everything about this proposal, but on balance, is this in the best interest of Colwood? Or is it, you know, so I think involving the public is more likely to get people involved in politics, and I think that's a good thing. At least two councillors here have been on the advisory, or an ex-councillor and a current councillor have been on the advisory planning committee. And so I think it does draw people into politics, which I think is also to the good of Colwood as a whole.
Speaking to Councillor Martin's concern around, you know, the whole idea of this commission sort of morphing into a policy-making group, that kind of thou shall not go there could be handled in a preamble for each of the meetings, you know, just to sort of repurpose what their position is and what their mandate is. Could it not?
Your Worship, whether it's a committee, a standing committee, or a commission, those problems are a problem. They're very real. They happen all the time. And the only way to avoid them is to not have any committees or commissions at all. And scope creep on committees or commissions is a constant battle. We've got one going on right now that will be coming to council eventually, where eventually the committees want more control and power and input on what happens, so they creep into other areas or beyond their original scope. And so the best way to stop it is to nip it in the bud early, and I think having a script that's in front of every commissioner, committee member moving forward in the future is going to be how we'll keep it under control. But it's a non-stop, constant battle that will always take the attention of council to keep under control, because it just naturally happens.
Anybody else? So we have the motion before us there as amended. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. But thank you, Rob. Points taken. 7.2.4, this is somewhat arising out of the previous conversation, and with the formation of this and some other considerations that are being made in and around our committees, I would like to ask council's indulgence that the recommendation there is before you, that we simply hold tight right now moving into 2017 till we can finish this review process.
I'll move the recommendation.
Seconder,
Second.
discussion. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. 7.2.5 memo in regards to Greater Victoria Public Library and agreement renewal.
Thank you, Your Worship. This item is brought before Council because the current library operating agreement with the Greater Victoria Public Library and the 10-member municipalities is expiring on December the 31st. The board is currently developing a new renewal agreement that will be for year 2017 to 2020, I believe. They've had consultation with the CAOs of the member municipalities, and the library staff are now pulling that all together to finalize the draft, which will be taken to the board of the library on November the 22nd. So because the board won't have an opportunity to look at that final draft and come up with an actual final version of the agreement and get it to the 10-member municipalities and get approval before the end of 2016, they have asked the municipalities if they would visit approval of an addendum to that agreement that would allow all of the rules and regulations to continue until such time as that process has taken place. One of the things they're also proposing for consideration by the councils, which will come forward when their letter is sent to us, is 3 significant changes to the existing agreement. I know it's outlined in the letter that you got, but I thought we should mention. They would like the agreement to go from a 3-year term to a 4-year term to match the revised election schedule or cycle. They want to have a single budget submission, and they want to spread municipal payments over a 12-month period as opposed to, I'm not exactly sure how they do it. It's an interesting formula, but they don't just get an equal payment once a month.
I think it's 11 months.
Is it 11 months? Okay. So they have a few housekeeping changes as well, which are, a few of those are outlined in the package that you received as well. So for consideration tonight, we're looking for council to approve an extension to the current library operating agreement set to expire December 31st, to allow its terms and conditions to continue to be enforced and binding upon the parties until such time as a new agreement is executed, and then we're looking for authority for the mayor and the CAO to sign that addendum.
Just before,
Mhm.
I just get a
You
clarification.
can move it.
No, I don't want to move it. Through the mayor to staff, since I sit on the library board and this does have a financial issue, do I need to excuse myself?
It's not budget yet.
Your worship, actually,
No finance on this.
I think unless you get a legal opinion that says you're no longer in a conflict, you're still in a conflict.
Then I will declare a conflict and just excuse myself at this moment.
Someone to move the recommendation?
I'll move the recommendation.
And a seconder?
I'll second it.
Discussion? Councillor Knoll?
I am just a little bit concerned with the open-ended recommendation, the current agreement to remain in effect until such time as a new agreement is executed. What if they have trouble executing the new agreement and it runs on for 3 years?
My understanding is that the agreement is actually very close to completion, but they can't even present it to their own board until November 22nd. They don't believe that the month of December will give them sufficient time to get that agreement in front of the 10 different municipal councils and get all the approvals in place before the year end. And their concern is that the current agreement will expire without all the approvals in place for the new replacement agreement.
Councillor Day?
Just a suggestion for a wording change to make it not so open-ended. Let's give them, whatever, 2 months or 3 months, so that it's not until such time as a new agreement is executed, but give them a specific date. So I don't know what date you'd like. How about March 31st?
What do you think?
That's plenty of time to do what they're doing, but isn't as open-ended. So it sort of addresses that problem that Councillor Nault was mentioning. So I'll
Amend.
make that motion to amend to, I don't know if March 31st is a good date, but maybe not because we're getting into budget times. But how about we just say February 28th? That's plenty of time. I guess I'm past Christmas and
Staff
through
have
January.
input on that for a second, Councillor Day.
Your Worship, the draft agreement that's been prepared by the Library Board extends it to January 2017.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand that.
Sorry. So,
when the new agreement's negotiated, it would come into effect January 1st, 2017.
oh, never mind. That's okay. I misread it.
Okay. So you're saying that giving that specific a date would be in conflict because they're bringing in a new agreement?
Yeah, the new agreement, it is complete. I think it's just timing for getting it in front of the board for ratification, and so I anticipate they're going to have it done fairly quickly, but I think they need to have an agreement in place that says it effectively is no longer in place once the new one is ratified, and I think that's the problem.
Sorry, we could do it for a date or until such time as a new agreement is in force?
Well, I think that that's already in there.
Okay.
I mean, it could conceivably, if everything fell into place, you know, it might be done by the end of December in readiness for January 1st. But, you know, anything going sideways, this is what they're covering off on. It probably has to do with insurance and things like that on their buildings and whatever to ensure that they've got agreements in place to cover off all their I's that need dotting and T's crossed.
Okay, I'm not going to try to fix it then.
So we're just going to leave it as is? Okay. Councillor Nault?
I think that is maybe a little bit irresponsible. I would suggest wording to allow terms and conditions to continue to be enforced and binding upon the parties until March 31st, 2017, or until such time as a new agreement is executed.
Mm-hmm.
So that gives them, as soon as the new agreement is executed, the old one ceases to be. I really don't want to leave this wide open like that. That seems to me to be a recipe for disaster, and things that we expect to move quickly sometimes don't, not to mention sewage treatment plants.
Okay, so there is an amendment then from Councillor Nault to say by
And I'll second the amendment.
March 31st or when the new agreement takes place.
I think it works. I'm back.
Seconded by Councillor Day. Any further questions, comments? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Somebody grab Mr. Merton. Oh, well, yeah, okay, and the main motion then, all those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries.
If I could just make a comment for Councillor Nault's benefit, you know, I don't think they can get their budget passed until they've got an agreement. Like, there'd be significant financial pressure to get this done ASAP in order to get a budget to carry on operating.
So moving on to the next item on our agenda, 7.2.6. It is the Canada 150 Art Tree Project. We do have a report put before us by staff to outline what this project is and what it could mean in our city. I think that it's something, you know, that gives us a great way to participate at minimal cost in there and get some, I think probably some pretty good feedback and collaboration with the schools. There is a recommendation in there because it is a cost value, but this has been looked at from staff through finance, and we do have some monies left from our grant funding program from 2016 that we could draw from and as indicated in the recommendation, that it would max out at 1,120, which includes the honorarium for the West Shore Arts Council facilitator to travel to all the schools and set these programs up in this project.
Move the recommendation, Your Worship. Second.
All questions?
Two questions for you, or not through you, Mayor. We've already spoken to the West Shore Arts Council, and they've agreed?
Yes.
Okay. And this is off topic a little bit, but I just wanted to bring it up because I don't know when else I could, is on the Colwood Community Association website on the Facebook, they also mentioned about the cenotaph in Colwood at the Wanda Fuca, and they bring up the fact that we could use, well, it reads exactly, perhaps this could, of course it goes on me, perhaps it could be a Canada 150 initiative to refurbish and rededicate the cenotaph. So who, I don't know where that would get directed to from a staff standpoint, so maybe they could I just put that on notice?
Yeah, so the cenotaph has been under discussion with staff. At one point when the League had possession of that Colwood Corners project, there was a keen interest in having it relocated in a public space at that spot. It continues to be profiled as a location where potentially we may be able to move it, and our staff in planning has been having conversations with the proponents there on that development to see what might be the best solution. The Legion also has funding available that would and could be contributed to the moving of this into a more appropriate and public location.
Yeah, no, sorry, I was just it was more from the standpoint of the Canada 150 grants. I just don't know if we're following through with, like, if we have a list that we're doing, or I don't know what we're doing
Staff?
with the grants.
Thank you, Your Worship. One of the things that staff could do is look at the Canada 150 grant opportunities and see if this is something that could come through our Heritage Commission as well, and see what opportunities might be there.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions on this art tree project? We have recommendation and seconder. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Marcy, for your work on that. Protective Services, Councillor Day, there is letter requesting support for the federal motion M47.
Thank you. This came to our attention through the Capital Region Action Team for Sexually Exploited Youth, and the Victoria Family Court and Youth Justice Committee has written a letter in support of the Standing Committee on Health examining the public health effects of the ease of access and viewing of online violent and degrading sexually explicit material on children, women, and men, recognizing and respecting the provincial and territorial jurisdictions in this regard, and that the said committee report its findings to the House no later than July 2017. There was on Saturday night a screening of the film, whose name now suddenly has gone out of my head.
Over 18.
There we go, over 18. Thank you. And some great work. I sent around to all of council a link to the little trailer preview for that film. And basically, because today's pornography is not the same as it was when we were growing up, it's violent, degrading, addictive, and unfortunately very available to youth. Anyone who's willing to click the X and declare themselves over 18. So the recommendation is, and I would so move, that Colwood Council approve the writing of a letter of support for Resolution M47, and that the letter be forwarded to the Fortress Foundation.
And just before we have a seconder, can I ask Councillor Day, what about the other municipalities that are within the capital region? Is this something, I mean, we receive letters all the time from other municipalities looking for support over an action. Do you know what they're doing?
Letters have been sent out to all municipalities. The City of Victoria passed it Thursday last week, and without dissent at their council table, which is, I hear, a big deal these days. And I'm trying to think, I believe perhaps it's the municipality of Oak Bay, but it is making its way through the council chambers throughout the region with a lot of interest by Fortress Foundation bringing this awareness forward, and also with Kathy Peters, who you will remember her letter before.
And it's stretching beyond, because I know my daughter's school in Cobble Hill area is putting on a engagement. So, seconder we need for your motion.
Second.
Any further conversation? Councillor Nault?
Well, I'll support this. It's kind of a no-brainer, but my expectations are extremely low that the government will ever get around to doing anything about it. It's an extremely difficult thing to enforce. It's, one person's pornography is another person's art. But restricting access to children is something, or minors, that I can easily support. And I think the issue there is parental control. If the parents aren't willing to take the time to control what their kids are watching, they can pretty well watch anything. And I don't see the government is going to ever find a way to control that.
Thank you. Councillor Day?
Well, just to offer a small glimmer of hope, one of the youth who's featured in the film, parents feel terrible to have seen their child become addicted to pornography, really in their own living room, because they weren't noticing what was happening. And so you can't download a song without some sort of a credit card. You can't have a credit card if you're under 18. So if we could just get the iTunes for porn, then at least the kids wouldn't be able to get it without a significantly more difficult time for them to get it.
There's a business.
There you go. Call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. We are moving into bylaws for this evening. We need final reading, please, on the speed regulation bylaw number 1612 for 2016.
Final.
All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Final reading again for bylaw number 1651, animal control bylaw 1533, 2014, amendment number 1. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Final reading for 1652, Municipal Ticket Information Bylaw number 1314, 2010, amendment number 6.
Excuse me, Your Worship. Excuse me. There is a requirement for council to approve the fine schedule by resolution prior to giving final reading of the bylaw.
Okay, I don't have that noted on here.
So it's just a motion to approve the fines that are stipulated in bylaw 1652.
Second.
All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. And then we can do the MTI?
Then you can do final of the MTI.
Okay. So then asking for final on 1652? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Bylaw number 1657 for first and second readings only. Colwood Land Use Bylaw number 151, 1989, amendment number 151. This is for the property at 333 Whale Road.
Move introduction.
All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Discussion? Anybody?
Sorry, 333, is that Pacific?
Pacific, yeah.
No, that's not.
The
Sorry,
West Shore Lodge.
Oh, it's the lodge. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
We're on second. Nobody's talking. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. And we're only looking for first and second on this one. We have nothing in camera this evening, nothing to release. Looking for our... Item number 11. Seconder? All those in favor? Not that we needed it. There you go.